I heard our friends from the Museum of Science say that it's the year of the human. So I wonder if we could meet you all beyond your bios as a human. So the question I wanted to ask you all is if you would share with us a memory or a story that you carry with you of a time when you felt really connected to a body of water or a waterway. Yeah? Go ahead.
Start. Hi, everyone. I'm Maria Belén Power, Undersecretary of Environmental Justice and Equity. And I do want to introduce my daughter, who's sitting right there, Maya, who's 11 years old. And I'm originally from Nicaragua in Central America, and I grew up there. And we grew up by a lot of bodies of waters, 2 oceans, lots of volcanic lagoons and lakes. We are the country of volcanoes and lakes. And I would say growing up, there were 2 bodies of water that I would say I feel really connected to, and it's 2 volcanic lagoons.
Oh, wow.
The first one, when I was really little, was Hiloa, which I guess last time it erupted, I also did my research. Last time it erupted was 6,000 years ago.
Wow.
And then as we grew older, we started going to this other lagoon called Apoyo, which we still go to now. And every time we go home to Nicaragua, my kids love going there. And that was a volcano 23,000 years ago. So it's just a really special place for me. And I just find it so amazing to be swimming in this lake that has so much history. And there are some spots on the sand that you can feel burning hot, even though, the lagoon is cool. Anyways, we love the volcanic lagoons in Nicaragua.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Kaya?
Awesome. Yeah, sure. So when I am not at school, I live back in Maine, or what is now called Maine, on a little tiny island that has a population of, I think, a little over 700 people or something like that. I'm not entirely sure. But it's always one of my favorite fun facts to share. Like, I was born and raised on this small island, and sometimes people don't believe me when I'm like, no, I was literally born on this small island that's less than 2 miles from top to bottom. But what that means is that I was born at my grandfather's house, which sits right on the banks of the Penobscot River. And so the Penobscot River has always held a special place, in my body, my soul, and not just because I'm a Penobscot citizen, or as you might hear at Penobscot. And so yesterday it was actually pretty cool. For one of my classes, we took a tour of the Peabody Museum at Harvard, which I'm sure many of you have gotten the chance to visit at some point. But we walked by this one exhibit called The Legacy of the Penobscot Canoe. And I was trying to look and take pictures. It was a public gallery, don't worry. But that's not one of the exhibits we ended up touring, and it just kept running through my mind the whole time. I was totally distracted, I'll admit, from the rest of the tour, because I just kept thinking about this one exhibit and hoping that the tour guides would mention it. And then at the end, they finally did, and the context that they mentioned it in was about resilience. And so they said, if you really want to see a story of resilience, you can go and check out this exhibit talking about how the Penobscot, or Penobscot people, took back their traditional cultural practice of birch bark canoe making, because there was a time where our river became so polluted that it wasn't safe to be able to travel in the Penobscot like our ancestors did all the time. And so for those of you that have gotten the chance to see the Heart of New England and the Omni Theater, you probably heard my grandfather talking about how when he was a kid, it was the case that it was so polluted and not safe to just go swimming in. And so it's just kind of cool that by the time I was born 22 years ago, it had cleaned up enough, and it was just this wonderful sort of energetic space for me to just be born into. So I thought that was kind of a cool full circle moment that it kind of came back to me yesterday. So yeah.
Beautiful.
I love that we're following the theme of home. So for me right now, it's Jamaica Pond. I live in Jamaica Plain, and I was just sharing behind the scenes how I love taking daily walks. I often do that with my partner. It's just like such an easy way to connect with a friend or to clear my mind in between meetings. Plenty of time to do that these days. And so I think of home in that way, like Jamaica Pond, right? Even right now today, because it was such a beautiful day, I got to see tons of people walking their dog or with their kids, and that's such a local gem that we have.
Thank you all. You might all be like, why are we talking about memories that have to do with water? I thought this was an arts and sciences panel. And I like to start sometimes with a question about waterways, because I find that, I think it was David earlier was saying that in any response to the climate crisis, we need to get away from the idea that only experts can take action. And when you start from a place of memory and connection to land and water, we realize that, oh, actually, everybody has some sort of connection, some that go back to many, many generations, right, that are connecting us to land and water. And when you start from that, you realize that I think we all carry quite a lot of love for land and water. And to go back to the seasons, one of the beautiful provocations from that show, for those of you who saw, you'll know, was about the way that all of those artists were connected to the land and their deep care for the earth that sort of compelled them to do something in response to the weather being all out of order. So anyway, I wanted to start us from a place of just who we are as humans and our, without all of our institutional affiliations and whatnot, just how we connect to land and water. Okay, I'm gonna move us along. So you do all have very fancy policy work that you're doing or aspiring to be doing. And I wanted to ask you a little bit, maybe each of you have a different perspective on why do you think it's important to consider how we shape narratives through policy work? And maybe you could each take a little bit of a different perspective on that, because I know you're each working in different levels of government and from different communities. Bea, I'm feeling a vibe from you. Can you start?
Okay. I love it. We're locking eyes, that's why. I would say it's important because when you're in those rooms, oftentimes it becomes about numbers, right? And I think it's very easy, especially right now, to get caught up in the physical urgency that we're seeing, right? And so we can lose our neighborhoods in those conversations. We can lose the families in those conversations. We can lose the youth who use those facilities in those conversations. And so even in thinking about how do we bring climate justice and the arts together, oftentimes we're missing the artists in those rooms. And so, policymakers and writers, they might have the data and the numbers, but the artists have the stories. And so those stories are what bring those neighborhoods to life. It's what helps people connect because they see themselves reflected in those stories. And it's oftentimes what moves us in a way that provokes us to take action. So I think that's important.
Yeah. Beautiful. Undersecretary, would you care to weigh in?
Sure. I agree in terms of numbers, and we can get really stuck in the data and the reports. And I like to go back to the work I did in Chelsea, and it is easy to, read a report and then put it away than to hear the stories of folks that live in Chelsea and and what it means to have 100% of the jet fuel that's used at Logan Airport on the Chelsea Creek, have 80% of the region's home heating fuel on the Chelsea Creek. 70% of the region's gasoline on the Chelsea Creek. 150,000 tons of road salt for over 350 communities. So I'm just, this is what it looks like to live in an environmental justice community. Yep. And then when you look at race and income and our public health indicators, it is not a coincidence, right? That this is what it looks like in communities like Chelsea, not just Chelsea, and East Boston and others across the state. But I think that that's really important when we're thinking about policymaking.
Yeah.
That's why we're doing it. We're not. Yes, I'm worried about the degrees that the Earth is warming, and yes, the sea level rise, and yes, the trees. But what about the people that are the most impacted by these benefits or burdens?
Can I ask you a quick follow-up, and then I want to go to Kaya? You mentioned environmental justice communities, and I have a little bit of a sense of what that is, but I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit about that, because I know that's Massachusetts state policy, and I just want to make sure that folks clocked that.
Yeah, so I was working at Green Roots when the legislation passed in Massachusetts in 2021, where for the first time ever we got a definition for environmental justice in Massachusetts. And it felt such a huge victory, and yet just sort of the bare minimum of what does it mean to live in an environmental justice community. And so our definition in Massachusetts is by demographics, so it's by people, and so it includes the criteria of race, income, and language. And there's different thresholds for each one. But it looks like people whose first language is not English, or folks that are low income, or folks that identify as minority. And you look at communities in Central Mass or Western Mass that are low income communities. That is an environmental justice population, folks that have been left out. And I do talk about the environmental justice movement in this country looks very different state to state.
Yeah.
Right? Like Florida, the West Coast, the South, then Massachusetts. Massachusetts is primarily white, right? Like I know that race is a determinant of health, right? And that race alone defines your outcome. And in Massachusetts, the majority of folks are white, and those are low-income folks that have been excluded and are being disproportionately impacted. So just a quick sort of history on the criteria and the law that we have in Massachusetts, and now we're starting to implement other policies like cumulative impact analysis.
Thank you. I'm learning so much already. Kaya, can I go back to you with this question about why you might think it's important to consider narrative as you think about a future in the policy world?
Sure, yeah, I know. That was also really fascinating for me to hear all of that, because my policy work is mostly done back home in Maine, and so it differs very much in a number of ways, but I'm really fortunate that a big chunk of my policy work right now is co-coordinating this youth campaign that's aiming to establish a green schools network in Maine. And so as my mom, who was a lower elementary teacher for many years, always says, kids are so much more fun to work with than adults. I would take working with kids over adults any day. And it's so true, because just the energy that they have. This is a smallish team of 8 high schoolers. There are youth leads, and their job is to mobilize other youth throughout the state and kind of make this whole idea of campaigning and writing testimony and going to public hearings in person and testifying right in front of the whole committee feel a little more equitable and accessible for younger people in our state. And so it's just so awesome to see how they're kind of taking hold of this narrative on their own. And like Bea mentioned, people can get so caught up in the numbers, and there are these stale political spaces that just are so in need of these fresh voices. And so it's just so awesome to meet with them regularly and hear about these creative ideas they get so excited about, whether it's hand making zines to visually represent the bill in a way that's more able to be consumed by the larger audience, or doing little TikTok style reels with a tiny microphone and things like that. But it's just so much fun. And I think the importance of including these youth voices in the narratives at all times it can't be emphasized enough.
Right on. Thanks, Kaya. Can I keep chatting with you as you drink a little sip of water. So you were just mentioning some of the work that you have been doing in Maine, and I know that one of the, Kaya is very impressive, y'all, and one of the many things that you've recently achieved is getting state level implementation over in Maine of Wabanaki studies in the Maine curriculum. And so for folks that are here because they're interested in the intersection of arts and sciences, and in sort of the Western tradition of knowledge, arts and sciences are separate, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about traditional ecological knowledge and what that might have to teach us about a more just future.
Yeah, sure. And I loved that as you were starting off this whole conversation, you talked about weaving threads together, because I was like, that theme is just perfect for all these things that I want to say. But yeah, I think it's really important to first start off by acknowledging that Indigenous peoples were the first scientists of our land.
Oh yeah.
And so, we can't have something like Western science without it ever connecting to things like traditional ecological knowledge at some point. It's always going to be there. It's the very foundation that these things were built on. And so that's another thing that we try to emphasize in Wabanaki studies all the time, is that everything is connected. We have different lessons that connect art to outdoor education, or English and math, or social studies and science. And it's just a really fun space to kind of interact with all of it at the same time. And I think it's good for students' brains too, to kind of experience this all at once rather than these different silos. But yeah, I think I just kind of totally went off track on that question.
No, you didn't. That's keep going. You're doing great.
Yeah, and so traditional ecological knowledge, like I said, is the foundation for so much of Western science, and also what we already understand about climate change. And so Indigenous people were the first people to see signs of the changing climate, and all these different practices that we implement today for sustainability and trying to shift over to a more sustainable, environmental friendly world. We're constantly kind of rediscovering these things that Indigenous people have been doing for centuries. And so there's a colleague of mine and my mom's that likes to say we don't need to recreate the canoe, kind of reinventing the wheel, something like that, when it's already there. And so I think the importance of this is just to connect and to collaborate all the time, and just make sure that all of these different voices are in the room, because while there are aspects that have been invented and that have evolved in the space of Western science, there's also so much that we can still learn from this traditional ecological knowledge piece. So yeah, everything's connected.
Amazing. Thank you. Bea, can I come to you with a question about some of your work? So I know you said that you work in urban planning, and I know we also had a whole conversation about how that is not your totality. And I wonder, I was looking at your website earlier today, and you say on your website that a better world is possible. Yes. And you use that as a frame that guides your practice as a multifaceted human. And I'm wondering if you could speak to us a little bit about why this lens, a better world is possible, which is a narrative that you're carrying with you. I'm wondering if you could speak about why that's important to you.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, I love these questions. They're so soul-searching. A better world is possible. I mean, the truth is that I had to find almost a mantra that would help me kind of hold all of these realities together, right? I think, again, the numbers can feel overwhelming when you're trying to tackle such a big issue, whether that's gender equity, racial justice, environmental justice. I think these are the systemic issues of our time, and getting it right really matters. I know every generation has likely felt that way, but I really feel that in this moment, all of these things are calling to us to really pay attention. And so a better world is possible. It's just another way of saying, this might feel really hard right now, right? But I want to be in conversation with you. I want to be in community with you to really figure out what's possible. And I think when we begin collaborations that way or projects that way, it just allows us to bring in curiosity and stay open-minded, so that even if we're not always going to see eye to eye, we know that that's our end, that's our end goal. That's where we're trying to meet each other.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Undersecretary, can I come back to you? So you have been Massachusetts' first ever Undersecretary for Environmental Justice and Equity now for about 2 years, yeah? I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how's it been going? How's the job been for the last couple of years? And I wonder how you see narrative change as a part of your policy work.
Yeah, like I said, I came from Green Roots, and at the time when Governor Healy was elected and Secretary Tepper called to ask if I was open to considering Undersecretary of Environmental Justice, we at Green Roots were fighting a substation, and folks were getting arrested, and it was really just interesting to feel, are you sure you want me? Do you know that I come from the folks that literally are getting arrested right now? But that really spoke to me about how meaningful Secretary Tepper and the governor really care, and we are embedding it into everything that we do. So I always say, at the office, that environmental justice can be a whole lot of everything or a whole lot of nothing. And so I have been sort of trying to be intentional of, well, what does that really mean, right? Yeah. So it means meaningful engagement and equitable distribution. Too simple if you're gonna forget everything else. It's meaningful engagement and equitable distribution. So meaningful engagement means early and often, it means multilingual. The substation that I was involved in, the hearing when it was approved, we had requested language interpretation to be provided. And residents from the community came, and it was not provided. Oh. It was gonna be too disruptive too. And so for us, that was a huge violation of civil rights, right? Like, we as a nation have decided that language, you fly into an airport and you see signs that are translated. So providing equal access to information is the bare minimum. So meaningful engagement early, often, making sure that folks are at the table. And I also say, if we're wondering when to engage residents, probably it's too late. Like, we've already made some decisions. So that means early and often. And have it reflect the outcome. Nobody wants to go to another night meeting. Nobody wants to go, why are you asking for my input if it's not really gonna translate into anything meaningful? So that's what it looks like for us.
Beautiful, thank you. I wanna cue our friends in the audience. I wanna remind you all that there's a QR code, and the hashtag is the point, or you could just go to slido.com if you have questions for these amazing people that I'm sitting up here with. I'm having a great time. I hope you all are too. But if you have questions that you would like us to chat about, I have the internet on this thing. So please ask your questions, and I will facilitate some questions from the audience. So while y'all are doing that, I have another question for anyone who wants to answer. If you all want to answer, please feel free. I am wondering why it might be important as we think about, the state of the world these days. And we heard earlier that often stories about climate can be told as stories of apocalypse. I feel like it's all doom and gloom, and even it feels even more so sometimes these days with environmental rollbacks and constant attacks on, it feels like everything sometimes. But I wonder, inside of that, why might it be important for us to keep centered on imagining stories of hopeful futures? a small question. Does anybody have go for it?
I'll just say something that you made me, a quote that a better world is possible. I have a sticky note in my office of a quote from Coretta Scott King, and I'm going to paraphrase it. I don't remember it word for word, but it is that justice is a never-ending struggle, right? We fight and win it in every generation, and so it is. We just have to keep going, and it has looked different in every generation, and it has looked different, in different parts of the world. But we have to keep going, and choose the tool of your choice, choose the issue that touches your heart. But we have to keep going, and we will fight for it, and we will win. But we have to keep going. That's sort of the. I just can't afford to be pessimistic. Otherwise, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I'm thinking about that, and I think you're absolutely right. It is a never-ending struggle, and I think having stories that not just perpetuate gloom and doom, or even like the scary, like everything's on fire. I think having stories that show us that we survived this, I think gives us permission to imagine, right? It gives us permission to think of a future where we are still here, right? And so I think I love those stories. ArtsEmerson has done such a great job in their selection. I was, bragging about backstage how I got to go to the eve of the abolition, and that was like a future imaginative story of a world with no prisons, right? And so I love being able to sit in the theater and place myself there. Like, what if, right? And there's so many other ways that I think we can create that as a reality, but we have to imagine it first. We have to give ourselves permission to imagine, to get creative, even if it feels absolutely ridiculous. I think let's get a little ridiculous. Right now, everything feels ridiculous. Well, why can't you imagine a world where there is clean air and clean water, and I'm not, holding back my breath because the space is not allowing me to breathe properly. I'd rather imagine a space where I don't have to do that. So let's give ourselves some permission to get creative, to imagine, and oftentimes that feels better than kind of telling ourselves that there's nothing that we can do, because then we end up convincing ourselves that that's true, and it is not.
Right on.
So my first thought when you kind of asked this question was how last November, when we all were kind of going through a pretty rough patch, we were shown about partway through how influential art and storytelling can be in our society today, when Wicked came out, and we all could just take a few hours to be in a room together where we were experiencing the story that was eerily similar to things that we had experienced, and maybe in many cycles throughout time, but instead the oppressive leader in power was a charismatic Jeff Goldblum character, and like our own feelings were kind of echoed through the voice of Cynthia Erivo. And so with that, like I don't know, I think just keep pouring into these things, and let's defy gravity, guys. Like I think there's so much we can look forward to through things like that.
That was perfect.
Wow. Defying gravity reference. Good job. I'm obsessed with all of you. And I'm also obsessed with the audience who's asking really good questions. I might need to pick and choose. Okay, so one of our audience members is interested in, so we've been talking a lot about shaping narratives. From various different perspectives, right? In policy, through writing, through advocacy, through organizing. These are all forms of narrative. And someone has asked, what does listening, or is shaping narrative a form of listening? And what does listening have to do with narrative shaping? Who does the shaping? They just love to hear thoughts about the intersection here with listening as we think about telling stories.
I think listening is so important. It's something that we don't do enough of today. Like, I just think we need to slow down and we need to take the time to, like Undersecretary mentioned earlier, like there are these stories that need to be heard and they need to be heard from the get-go. Like, we can't continue just pushing forward without taking these into account. And sometimes I think we don't realize that we don't need to be moving at this fast pace all the time, but we've just become accustomed to it. And so the amazing thing about storytelling is it prompts listening, and good listening at that. And so just, yes, continue listening to others and just taking time to let it sink in.
These are some really good questions. I love what you just shared, and I think, you were talking earlier about meaningful engagement. Well, meaningful engagement can't happen without listening, right? You can't show up and say, we're going to host this meeting, we want to hear your input, and we're going to talk to you for 45 minutes. I'm like...
Government doesn't do that. They don't do that at all.
I'm not picking on you, but... It happens time and time again, right? I think in urban planning we have this the design charrettes, I think, is like a kind of like cool design term, and it's meant to get you to work with your hands and meet other people, and I love things like that. Like more of that, please, right? Like let's get creative even in our policy making, and bring people out to the neighborhood. Like do walks with them. Don't just have them sitting in a space. I think you used the word stale earlier, right? Like, don't just have them sitting in this stale room with no windows and ask me for my input. I'm already in a bad mood by the time you start the meeting, And so I think listening is extremely important, especially in this moment where it feels like everything is on the agenda, right? And so we are going to have to really sit down and feel into our bodies and look at each other in the eyes and say, like, let's take a deep breath and let's see what we can do together, right? And listening is a key part of that.
Do you want to add?
I think the only thing I'll add is that I'm sure we all have friends and families who we disagree with politically. And I really think that we need to start listening more, that we all have a lot more in common than we think. And that I have family members and friends who, if they just don't understand, they don't understand, they don't know the truth. They don't know what really happened. By they, I mean whoever you disagree with politically. But there is no, right? Everyone has their own truth. And so I really think that we need to start talking and listening more to the folks that we think we may disagree with, but there's a lot more that we have in common if we're really going to make a change and if we're really going to bring folks together and bring everyone to the table, not just those who agree with us, but we really have to listen and try to understand where everyone is at.
The hard work. Okay, I'm seeing a thread of questions in here from the audience where some folks are asking about, one person put it like this: what is the difference between a positive view or sort of an optimistic view and a sort of Pollyanna take on the future? But I want to sort of weave in sort of what we were all just talking about around, given where we are in the sort of current federal administration, and the ways in which the media narratives are being reshaped, narratives around power and who has power is being reshaped. How do we think about hopeful futures that are, as Bea, you were saying about like really rooting into our bodies and listening? I'm wondering how you think about, maybe differences between Pollyanna views of the future and like authentically hopeful, resilient visions of the futures that we deserve.
I love this. Okay, I would say for me, the Pollyanna side of it is not listening to community. Not listening to the people most affected, not listening to the neighborhoods and localities that we know are going to be underwater, like not placing them first, right? I think that's the Pollyanna view, in my opinion. It's like pretending like we're all at the same starting point. That's the Pollyanna view. And I think there is possibility for us to say, all of us are important. These policies need to include everyone. And we need to also think about the systemic harms that got us here and being honest with ourselves about what that means and letting that guide us.
Beautiful. You want to add anything?
That was a great answer. Thank you.
Bea got it. Let me see here. I'm kind of asked still. Oh, there's more. Oh, okay. This is a fun thread. How can any of y'all speak to how you think climate justice narratives may vary between generations? So there's a sort of intergenerational thread being offered by one of our audience members. I know, Kaya, your work is a lot with youth right now, but I'm curious about intergenerational storytelling or stories that maybe our ancestors told about futures. I'm a little bit riffing right now, so if anybody wants to pick up a thread around intergenerational storytelling and narratives of the future, that's the thread from our audience.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that in community organizing in Chelsea and trying to engage all residents that live in Chelsea, we really made sure to connect with, not just those who could afford to come to a meeting in the middle of the day, but really trying to engage, folks from different generations, folks from different cultural backgrounds, and that there's a lot, again, maybe I said it already, there's a lot more that we all have in common, right? From different folks that come from different generations. We were working on this microgrid in Chelsea, and I, for one, was like, why am I working on this very wonky, technical, like this is not what I really, but it really connected with people on the ground in Chelsea who lived there and came from Central America, who lived through hurricane, oh my gosh, I can't forget the name. I can't remember the name. Hurricane Mitch. I was living in Nicaragua. But who lost power for a really long time. And so we feel like, oh, well, no, it's, the experts have the answers. Well, no, this older lady who came from Honduras knew exactly what she needed. She knew exactly what it was like to lose power for months and months during a storm. And so just understanding that everyone has a part of the truth and a part of the story that contributes to the solution. I truly believe the solutions need to come from the ground up. They are rooted in the people that are feeling the hardest impact. Before COVID, nobody thought we would get hit by COVID. We always were planning for a climate disaster. But yet, the very same thing happened. The folks that were hit first and worst, and the folks that are having still the hardest time bouncing back are the very same populations that are having the same impact with the climate crisis. They're getting hit first and worst and are having the hardest time bouncing back. I went on another thread from the generation, but that, it really is engaging everyone in the community.
Can I just share? I think that's extremely important to think about because oftentimes our community members don't use these like fancy words, right? They may not even be saying climate justice, but they can tell you about their lived experience. And through that thread, you can then understand how to support and get them the resources that they might need. And so I think that that's really important, being able to understand people's experience as knowledge and using that experience as expertise. I think that's important.
Yeah, so kind of along the lines of generational, like I think it's important to remind ourselves sometimes that like for our youth, I mean myself included, this overarching theme of climate change is kind of all we've ever known, and that can be a lot sometimes, or a lot of times. But then we also have these small little successes places, like I mentioned with the Penobscot River, and like kind of like removing dams and the fish are coming back and less pollution and all of this. And so that is the point where it's so important for our different generations to kind of like band together. And so like I've known a clean river where my grandfather didn't, but then he's also seen like other aspects before the climate has changed to what it is today. And so just supporting each other like throughout all of these different times and through all of our experiences that we've had throughout the years is crucial.
Okay, beautiful, beautiful. I think what I'm gonna do is, I heard we have about 10 minutes left. So I'm curious, I have some questions that I would love to ask y'all as we sort of come to a close for the evening. I'm wondering if there are projects that you are working on right now that you want the audience to know about that potentially people could support y'all on, because I know I am like totally obsessed with all three of you and want to fangirl about all of your work. So basically I want to expand my fan club. So how can we help you all? Go, Kaya, go.
I was like looking at my mom to like get the okay, like is this something that I can like share in this space? But yeah, to give like a brief little rundown, Annalisa mentioned that I've been working a lot on Wabanaki studies in education in Maine, and so, or what is now called Maine, as we're trying to like get through people's heads. Because it's important to kind of put ourselves in that context sometimes, but anyway, I'm getting off track. So there was actually a law passed in 2001 requiring Wabanaki studies to be taught in all Maine schools. And so this is a year before I was born, and now I'm 22, and it's still not taught in most of the schools in Maine. And so currently we are going through the process of putting through a bill that's an act to strengthen Wabanaki studies in Maine. And what it would do is ensure a position for a Wabanaki studies specialist in the Maine Department of Education, so that there's always someone kind of like making sure that this is happening, connecting with districts, educators, seeing what can we do to help you, how can we make this a more accessible thing, so that everyone can learn about the Wabanaki people. And also it would ensure that so many Wabanaki advisors are compensated for their time kind of sharing their knowledge and all of their practices and everything that's going into this curriculum. And so I think that ties a lot into the work that we've been talking today, the importance of traditional ecological knowledge. And this is something that, like, in order to learn this and like stay educated on everything that we should with climate justice, climate education today, like we have to start with this crucial piece of Indigenous studies and learning about the first peoples of our land. And so I know a lot of you are Massachusetts based, but if you ever do any digging into what's going on in the Maine legislation right now, like that's something to definitely flag. And if you have any friends, family in Maine, tell them to support the bill and tell their friends to support the bill. But yeah.
Right on. Go ahead.
If you're into energy siting, we are working on developing cumulative impact analysis for the siting of energy infrastructure. And we're having a few public stakeholder meetings. And it is, uncharted territory. This is the first time ever that we are working on developing a tool that will take into consideration cumulative impacts before we decide where to site an energy facility. Oh, wow. So I'm learning a lot, but I think it is really exciting to start to see cumulative impact be implemented in different areas of work. So we've done it a little bit in air permits, and now we're doing it in energy infrastructure. So if you're into energy, if you're into siting and cumulative impact, we'd love to have folks give us their input. We have 3 sessions coming up, in person and virtual as well.
Yeah, I'm living vicariously through my panelists and my colleagues here. Honestly, I'm kind of in a rest season. I'm going on vacation soon.
Oh, yeah.
So that's kind of what's on my mind. It's like the countdown has begun. So I'm looking forward to just some rest. And I think we should all be taking more time off if we can, even if it's one day or an afternoon that you allow yourself. I think it's really needed. And go offline. I just recently went offline for like 2 months, no social media. I did a clean break, and it felt really good. I might do that again. So that's kind of what's on my mind.
Right on. Thank you. Okay, and then the question that I want to leave us on, and plugging the Utopian Hotline, which starts on May 1st, one more time. One of the central questions of the Utopian Hotline is, if we were to send a message into the distant future, what message would we send? If we were to send a message into the distant future, what message would we send? I'm wondering what is resonating for you? I'm sort of thinking about everything that has been spoken this evening, and I'm wondering if there's anything that's coming to you that you want to send off into the distant future.
I feel like.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, one thing that comes to mind is that it is frontline communities, vulnerable communities, disadvantaged communities, whatever term you want to use, have always been leading. And we have to just follow their lead. And that for generations, for decades, it has always been the most disadvantaged communities that have been leading the change, and those most impacted by the issues. And so for me, that's sort of the story, is where does the power lie, and where does the true power to change structures and to make positive change is follow the lead of those most impacted.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, my first thought is, if anything, I feel like we need people from the distant future to be sending us inspirational messages right now.
Oh, yeah. Turn it on its head.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, I think that, or I hope that in the distant future, we're still creating in such big ways like we are right now, and being creative in all of these different spaces. And I think that is an important reminder for us all today to just keep creating, whether it's coming up with creative solutions for the world's most pressing problems right now, or just taking 20 minutes to kind of relieve yourself from all of those pressing issues and just painting something or writing a poem or just finding some way to stimulate your brain in those creative manners. I think it's just a good thing to hold with us.
Absolutely. I think what's resonating for me, based on what you both have shared, is also that a lot of this knowledge is with us. It's in the communities that we live in. It's with the people that we work with. It's with our neighbors, our friends, our families. And I think being able to make more space to connect and to gather and to just be in conversation, even how we are tonight, I think that is critical in this moment. Being able to just connect, make time for your community, make time for your friends, and oftentimes that's the first thing that falls off the calendar, right? But actually now more than ever, that's when you really need those spaces to be able to digest what's happening, but also to create together and to collaborate together.